So I apologize. This is sort of the kitchen sink week of the class where I just sort of throw a bunch of different things in this to sort of build up an intro week. But I thought it'd be a good thing to talk about is just like as we begin to build out these tools, how do you also communicate and market these tools to your customers? I think we've seen a lot of different ways that customers are talking or like companies are talking about AI tools to their customers. And I've seen some things that I think are working well and some things that I think are working poorly. So maybe this is you and your product marketing folks talking about how you market the product you're building. So one thing is you don't actually have to talk about this in terms of it being AI. No one says, hey, we have to define ourselves by our stack, right? So no one is saying like, hey, we're the Python company that builds tools for you, or we're the Rust company that builds these tools for you, right? Like we don't usually talk about products in terms of how they're built. We talk about in terms of what they achieve or what they do for you. I think a great example of this is DaVinci Resolve. For years, or up until very recently, DaVinci Resolve never really talked about their tools as being AI under the hood. They had a number of tools, I think like some noise reduction, face refinement, object removal. Like they had a bunch of tools that were more or less AI tools. They just never said they were AI tools to their customers. Now, in the past year or so, they have been highlighting that they use these neural tools more. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe just because people are more comfortable with it, so they feel like it's an okay time to talk about it. But even within their tool today, like they don't talk about face refinement as being an AI tool. They just talk about it as refining faces. And I think that's a fascinating way to approach it. And honestly, probably a good way to approach it because AI tools today are kind of a messy and like divisive topic that by just saying, hey, we just want to solve this particular task for you, it doesn't matter how we do it or what tool we're using under the hood as long as it works for you. And I think that's a great point of view here is that like if the tool works and no one cares how or why. Whereas I think a lot of people are talking about AI and just sort of overhyping it almost to maybe cover up the fact that it doesn't actually do what we're telling you it's going to do. And I think we'll look at some examples of that later as well. But anyway, I love this example. It's just like, no, we just do a thing and you don't care that it's AI if it works. Like we could be doing some very complicated, computational thing. And as long as it works, that's what matters. So keep that in mind as we begin to talk about these tools, because I think that's a nice way to think about things. If you do choose to highlight that you're using AI, I would say like, as I've highlighted without everything in this class is like, think carefully about how you describe it. I think there's a challenge to overemphasize or oversell these tools as magic or as doing everything under the sun. And that usually backfires because as we've seen, like many of these tools are not great right now. Another thing that my bugaboo for a long time, which I certainly lost on, is I always liked referring to these tools as machine learning. I think machine learning is slightly less hyperbolic. I know it's still hyperbolic, but I lost this war. People call them AI tools now. And I've even started referring to them as AI tools because trying to split the hairs between machine learning and AI when everyone just refers to as AI is a challenge. So I don't think we can put this back in the box. I think it's just AI going forward. But I kind of wish we had kept machine learning. Again, like I'm fairly conservative in how I want to talk about these tools, and I want to talk about them honestly. And I think artificial intelligence is giving them too much power or implying they do things they do not do. So as I might have mentioned, just now is that like, I think it's important to not obfuscate or lie about these tools. I think a lot of companies are relying on these things as calling them magic, giving them sort of people-based personas, like they're emotional or they're human or they pause at the right moment to seem like they are something more of a person. I think this is just a bad path to go down. I think it implies something that isn't really there, and I think if anything, that means you're going to lose trust when that all is revealed, right? So like a good example of this is like the ChatGPT kind of does that like typing out thing where like it feels like it's pausing to think and then it like slowly responds. But if you ever use a tool like this, it just spits out a message in like a couple seconds. And they're sort of implying that there's some human behind the scenes. And I get what it's doing. It's trying to make it appear a little bit more human so you empathize with a little bit more. But I personally think it's just such a lie. It's so fake. And while it probably does something good to like, create some personal behavior or personal attachment, I think in the long run it kind of does us a disservice by implying that these tools are doing something that really not. And I'll admit, like, I have a very conservative take on this, or I have a very like maybe matter of fact and to the point take on this. But I think lots of other companies are doing the opposite, and I fear that the opposite is just going to lead to bad patterns. It feels in many ways like a dark pattern. We're rebuilding dark patterns for new tools. And I really want us to avoid those and think about how we actually message these tools. So that in mind, let's talk a little bit about iconography. This came out, I guess, a week or two ago. Someone had posted that like, AI symbols can be more than just the sparkle emoji. And I've long disliked the sparkle emoji as the icon for what AI tools are. There's a good article, or an interesting article maybe from March of last year, so it's almost already a year old, around how every company is using the sparkle magic icon as a way to define their AI tools, right? And we've, for decades now, have used software as magic, right? It works so well. How could it work? It's, it feels like it's magic. And I get that notion. But especially with AI tools are not magic. One of the parts of this class, I want to be able to break down these tools for you, so you understand they're not magic. They're doing something very specific, and they're doing it in a way where if you've never seen them before, they can feel like magic. But once you've seen them over and over and over again, you know exactly what they're doing. And I think this is, again, as we begin to see this saturation of the marketplace with these tools, as we begin to see every company aping each other, I think it just leads to this problem where like people are going to be very aware of what these tools actually are and actually going to sort of reject the notion of magic. And I think being more direct and being honest about what they are is actually a better long-term goal for us. So sparkles are sparkles. I don't love them. I wish we had a better solution here. If you Google, AI iconography, you get a lot of this stuff. So actually, they don't really show sparkles when you Google it. They show a lot of brains with computer chips. They show a lot of computer chips in general. A lot of these are probably way too complicated for small spaces. So I understand why the sparkle ends up being the thing. And also, like, I don't love the neuroscience side of these machine learning tools. I know lots of people get really into it and try to think about like, oh, is this just replicating the brain, that sort of thing. But again, I worry that we are making too much of an emphasis around humanity, or like, hey, it's a human brain underlying these things, which is a distortion of these tools, to say the least. And again, I think they imply an intelligence that maybe isn't necessarily there. Maybe one day it will be, and I'll be, have to mea culpa here, but like, I do think a lot of this is implying a certain level of intelligence that doesn't really exist in these tools. So I always make these claims like, oh, we shouldn't use magic, we shouldn't use brains, and then people are like, well, what should we use? And so for this class, I was trying to think about this, like, what would I recommend using? And I kind of came across like the science-based icons, or like the lab beakers, or that sort of thing. So something like this, right? So using this as an icon. Again, maybe a little complex for certain spaces, but I think you can make it work. Hell, if you want to put a little magic sparkle inside the beaker, fine, whatever. As long as we've got like something that's sort of rooted in science. And the reason I like this is like AI is really a part of data science, right? A lot of this is based on data sets and data science. And while data science isn't necessarily the same as scientific science, I do like the idea that they're connected in a way, and that it is not magic. I think that's the one of the clear things to me is like, I don't want to refer to these as magic because they're not magic. And the reason I don't want to refer to them as magic is that when things go wrong, the company can often sort of like shrug their shoulders and be like, well, it's magic, we don't know what happened here, which is fundamentally the wrong way to approach it. All these things are solvable or understandable if you put in the effort to do so. The other reason I kind of like this one is I see this icon a lot for R&D or like lab experiments. And as I mentioned before, I think many of these tools are not ready for prime time. And I think it's much, much better for you to actually announce like, hey, this is a thing in beta, or this is a thing that we're experimenting with. We don't yet think it really works as well as it should. We're aware of that. You're going to be aware of that. And I think it builds a little bit of that trust around like, hey, like, we're all aware that this is a bit of an experiment. We're going to try stuff out and see what works, but like, don't hold us to any of these things. Now, I will admit one of the downsides of these things is that I think people tend to think about science as truthiness, or being reality, and a lot of these tools do not do that. So I can understand this. There's no perfect solution for a lot of these tools. Maybe we just need to make some other like icon that means nothing, but we can imbue it with the powers of AI. But this is kind of where I would go instead of going to the world of sparkles. Sparkles, man, so bad. Even though I've used them in many cases myself, I totally understand what's going on there. So this gets me to sort of this other area of a discussion, which is trust. I actually just had an interview with Baron Webster, who is a designer, and we'll be releasing that video in the coming weeks. But we talk a lot about trust in that, and how trust is one of those things that AI tools can build up over time, but also eliminate very quickly. And again, many of us have probably had this experience where you hear from someone like, "Oh, ChatGPT is amazing; it'll do anything for you," and you go over there and you type in something like, "Hey, write me a poem," and it writes you the worst poem ever, and you're just like, "This sucks. What's good about this?" Right? That sort of overhyping of these tools. If anything from this class, as you can probably tell already in this first week, is we are not going to hype any of these tools. We are going to talk about them in very plain terms. We're going to look at what works and what doesn't. And I think this is sort of the factor I want to bring into how we approach that with our customers as well. Let's be honest about what these tools mean or don't mean, what they can do and what they can't do. And let's deal with the trust of that as it comes, and let's do it realistically and not kind of bury our head in the sand and just say like, oh, well, it's the AI, it's not on us. I recently saw that MailChimp is using this sort of terminology here. Now, I don't work at MailChimp anymore. I wasn't involved in any of this, and this is nothing to say that my former coworkers are doing anything bad here, but I do think it's interesting to see. You can write a subject line using Write with AI, but not necessarily prominently, but they do include right here is generative AI may produce inaccurate or biased information. You are responsible for your email content, meaning, hey, if your AI writes some racist stuff and we ban you for doing racism, that's on you, not on us or our AI. And this is such a fascinating conversation to be had right here, right? Is if you are playing with an AI tool and it does something inappropriate, is it on you? Is it on the company implementing it? Is it on, who's at fault here? And I think what's interesting here is MailChimp is sort of saying like, hey, that's really on you. You should know that we know our tools are not perfect, but you should still be a judge of what makes the most sense. And this is such a tricky area to be in. Because again, like if I ask you to write me a headline for a new sale and the headline says 30% off because that's what the generative model decided was a good percentage off and you're only giving 10% off, man, that's going to look bad for you if you ship that out. And then you're going to think poorly of the service and it all breaks down from there. So again, like trust is such an important thing to think about. And I think it's one of the reasons why I would encourage companies to be cautious about building in these tools. Here's a nice little icon they did. It's kind of sparkly, but also not sparkly. So, interesting. Sure, we could just as a class, like just do an investigation of like every tool we use and what icon they use for their different AI services. So to sort of sum up this section, unless you're a startup building like solely AI tools, like there are a lot of startups who are just doing AI tools or trying to find an AI tool that matches a customer segment in order to like build a valuation and grow their company. I actually think for many companies who are already invested in certain software, adding AI tools can actually be a bit of a risk. It might not look at it on the surface, but it can quickly degrade your product if you aren't careful about it. And it can create unrealistic expectations. So one of the great things that Baron mentioned in this interview was that, he works at Replit. So Replit is an engineering, helps you write code. And many people saw their messages and said, oh, I don't know how to write code at all, but I want to make an app. Can Replit do that for me using AI? And that's not really Replit's cup of tea. Like that's not what they specialize in. They work with engineers to help engineers work faster. But they don't work with non-engineers to become engineers or non-engineers to build apps that they don't know anything about using AI. And I think this is one of the challenges is that you can say, oh, we make this simple and easy for you to do. But if it's not the right customer, you can also make the wrong message and create unrealistic expectations. So all of this to say is like how you communicate these tools is just as important as how you build the tools. And I think product marketing has a lot to work on here. And you as a designer might have some input into that. So you should be aware of that and think about that as you begin to build this out. And as you choose an icon, please don't choose sparkly icons.